there's a certain pride also that mechanics have with the equipment they take care of. They're proud of it. Okay. But when you reduce mechanics' ability to maintain equipment, you don't just erode the customer relationship, you erode the pride and tradition of that mechanic. And that's not what this industry was built on. And that's not how this industry remains strong. I say you can restore both and maintain margin and grow it at the same time.
Hello, and welcome to the Elevator Careers Podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group. I am your host, Matt Allred. In this podcast, we talk to the people whose lives and careers are dedicated to the vertical transportation industry to inform and share lessons learned, building upon the foundation of those who have gone before to inspire the next generation of elevator careers. Today, our guest is Chris Short, a leader and visionary in the elevator industry. Chris has been in the industry for 20 years and has led pioneering efforts to use IoT technology to improve elevator service and efficiency while also increasing margin. Recently, Chris co-wrote and delivered a presentation at the International Elevator and Escalator Symposium entitled Targeted Elevator Maintenance, Leveraging IoT, Achieving the Trifecta of Labor Efficiency, Profitability, and Customer Satisfaction. Join us now as we talk with Chris and explore these areas that are so critical to the success and growth of elevator contractors now and into the future. Chris, welcome to the show.
Well, Matt, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
You know what? My thoughts exactly. I'm excited to have you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm excited to dig in today. I know that you and Rob Worth just recently presented a paper at the IEEE conference down in the Bahamas, which sounds like a blast. Sounds like a fun trip.
It was great. Great opportunity. Yeah, it was all work, believe me.
Absolutely. So the paper's titled Targeted Elevator Maintenance, Leveraging IoT, Achieving the Trifecta of Labor Efficiency, Profitability, and Customer Satisfaction. And I just want to dig into some of these key points because as I was reading it, there's a lot here. There's a lot of opportunity, and obviously, from what I understand, you've already done this, and so you're really trying to take some of this magic that you've created and share it with the world, which I think is awesome.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity again to be able to discuss it. It is a passion point for me because when I entered the industry about 20 years ago, I found that the method that the companies I had previously worked for were employing were, from a preventative maintenance perspective, the mechanic led the way that the elevators were serviced, the communication with the customer. And I'm not downplaying any of it. I think it actually created a nice bond between the
Sure.
field mechanics and the customers. It created that loyalty. However, if you're looking to scale and grow your business, you need to have some elements of control in them in order to say to understand what work's being done and what manner it's being done and how you can improve that on the customer's behalf. The second challenge that I found working on the independent side was that when we go up against the larger international companies that price their maintenance portfolio or programs along the same lines, the level of service they were providing their customers versus the level of service I wanted to be able to provide our customers. There had to be a way of still being able to do what we promised to do in the agreement while maintaining margin. So instead of saying, well, mechanic, you're not going to um, perform preventative maintenance on this elevator for the next 2 months, you can go every quarter. How could we still maintain a monthly presence and take care of the equipment we were insuring under a full maintenance agreement and still keep our margin level with the same cost pressures as the larger company? So instead of reducing labor, reducing presence, I wanted to take the approach of how do we increase it? How do we
Yeah.
maintain that level of service? Frankly, um, in my own personal life, uh, if there's somebody coming to take care of my air conditioning units at my home or my furnace or whatever, I expect them to do what needs to be done on the equipment that I'm paying for them to maintain. I just don't want them here because it broke and now I have no choice but to replace it. To me, that's a
Right.
disservice to a customer that you are getting into an agreement with a preventative maintenance program. So that's where it stemmed from.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful, and like I say, um, I was just impressed with kind of the thought that you've put into it and the practice and really dialing it in so that it works. Like you say, it's been proven. And you talked a little bit about this, but let's go ahead and just dive into the current state of elevator maintenance. You talked about the kind of the discretionary nature. The head
Mhm.
mechanic kind of leads the charge. Tell me a little bit more about current state.
Well, let's start off with the phrase that can irritate some people, but there's a lot of truth in it. You cannot improve what you cannot measure.
Absolutely.
So if the state of elevator maintenance in a lot of independent companies is to over the mechanic work tickets and say, here's your maintenance for the month, and we'll see you when you're finished. 9 times out of 10, at the end of the month, it'll be finished. It's magic how that happens every month. But is what's being done on the equipment? How is that being tracked? Also, how are you better able to communicate with your customer when there's a need that they need to be aware of in a proactive manner versus a reactive? So commonly we find ourselves in reactive mode. It's now shut down. The customer is in need of service to be performed, repair to be performed, but they're at the deficit. They're at the point now where they're feeling um, cornered. They have to make a choice, whether that may be something that's outside the agreement. Now they've got to come up with money they didn't budget for. So that creates now an adversarial relationship between contractor and customer. So that's also not controllable from a business and a scaling perspective. How can you still provide the proper service to the equipment that's specified to the equipment? And another challenge is, look, we deal with elevator equipment that has a controller made by brand X, and the door operators brand Y, and the buttons are another company. So you've got this myriad of equipment mixtures that all work together, but all of those different types of equipments require different amounts of attention to be paid for them on the preventative maintenance side. But now you've got a portfolio of 1,000 or so elevators. Well, how do you write a specific maintenance program for those elevators? And when you look at that from the 30,000-foot level, you would say that is very complicated. How do you do that and still maintain a margin as a for-profit company? And what I realized was that you could look at these from a time management perspective. What the mechanic does within reason for a certain amount of time that correlates to the contract. So what the customer's buying, they're expecting.
Right.
Now the mechanic is performing based on what the customer understands they bought, what's included, what's not. The equipment itself is getting maintained specifically and noted, okay, in a
Right.
database for tracking purposes, so that further communication can be related back to the activities done. And overall, you're providing the service that you promised the customer. You're trying to stop those surprises and get us out of in the elevator business, the service business. We were always in a very reactive mode, and
Right.
reactive mode causes employee burnout. It causes all these other things and to satisfy customers.
Increased downtime. I mean, you point out several, deficiencies, and one being how do you improve it? Like you you talked about that earlier. If you don't really know what you have, kind of.
Well, there's people much smarter than I that actually solved this problem 15 years ago, and so looking at the concepts of those, and the elevator industry from a technology perspective have not been the early adapters of what the next step is going to be from a technology and IoT perspective. Uh, and also, we also don't want to, as independent organizations, we also don't want to rely on technology to be our connection to the customer, right?
Right.
So what we want to do is have that more transparent communication with the customer so they understand what they buy, the service they're receiving. And then when things do go upside down, when equipment fails, because equipment does, it's a much more informed discussion with the customer versus uh, they have to make a decision. They're not happy about it. And we don't feel great about having to do it, but that's not the situation we're in. So there is a way to model a preventative maintenance department in a elevator company's portfolio that addresses the key needs of the elevator from a preventative maintenance perspective, based on what the customer is willing to agree to in a contract.
Right. Well, the nice thing about that is once they've agreed, they have, I guess, there's more visibility. They don't feel as blind. Sometimes I
Mhm.
feel like that. Going to the dentist, right? Do I really have a cavity? Do I really? I don't know. I can't.
Exactly. You're not a dentist, of course.
Right.
Of course. But I also feel that there's an educational piece for the customer that the independents have struggled, I think, over the years to message appropriately. And frankly, because they've been busy building their companies and providing service. But it doesn't mean it's any less important. the 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 thought process was, well, if I have a full maintenance contract as your customer elevator contractor, if it breaks, you fix it. Well, how
Sure.
many times have we run across customers that the contractors have said, yes, it's broken, but it's not our responsibility? And the customer then says, but it says here in writing it is. And then there's a certain scenario under paragraph 5A, section 3, that says, well, this is why it's not. So the other side, so that also now puts all the liability on the contractor for equipment
Right.
failure. Well, that's an uneven relationship. So if that relationship is that way, it can never be fully satisfied. Elevator contractor can never make out with the margin they're trying to achieve as a for-profit business and growing their company, and the customer will never be able to say, well, it's all taken care of, when it truly isn't.
Right. Right. And so, yeah, it sounds like it's, and maybe that's the way some companies like to compete with each other. Hey, we're just going to go cheaper, cheaper, but kind of taking on the risk that, hey, if the generator goes out, we're really toast on this contract.
Right, right. And by the way, I think it's actually okay if a customer says, I want the cheapest offering you can give me. That's perfectly fine. As long as it's appropriately stated what the contractor owes under the agreement and the customer understands that's what they're buying. But you can't falsely promise that equipment is going to be covered when in essence there's ways of getting around that if an incident occurs, and we all know that that's happened. While at the
Sure.
same time, if we're not putting in place a preventative maintenance program that can actually take care of the equipment, well, then the equipment's going to fail at some point anyway. It's not being taken care of appropriately. So again, the challenge was, how do we as an independent elevator organization properly take care of the specific type of equipment that a customer has installed in their facility? How do we write a maintenance program for that that does not take us getting to the minutia of going back to the 25-year history that you can't figure out anyway of what's been done to that elevator? How do you take it from today? Day one, I walk in, here's your elevator, here's your operating environment. How do we create a maintenance proposal for you that'll share the liability of the equipment and the age of it, right, in a way the customer finds fair? Um, do task-based specific maintenance items on that equipment based on the type of elevator it is, age, etc. And then also, how do we provide confidence back to the customer that what they're paying for, they're actually receiving, and we can achieve that through IoT.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you talk a little bit about, in this article, the need for change with the evolving landscape of the elevator industry, changes in the economy, shifts in the workforce necessitate a new approach to elevator maintenance and kind of, tackling all these items because I think to your point, the world is changing and there are a lot of uncertainties. And so how can we, put our best foot forward there, out there and have an agreement that we can feel good about, that they can feel good about, that we can execute on and still make a margin and they
That's
can
right.
still be happy about, right? Is it even possible?
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. One thing that I found that I became rather passionate about that I didn't realize was such a need in our industry, and it may be like this in other industries, but for me, this was my awakening, is the need for business structure or infrastructure to be set up before any of this can be tackled.
Okay.
Now, this is not overly complex, but it's vital. Without without a company being structured appropriately, not just for who fills the title in a
Sure.
company, but really who does what. How does accountability with employees be achieved? How do we resolve and bring up issues to the appropriate level they're supposed to be brought up? If you're the president of a company, do you need to know that the coffee maker is not working in the break room? Well, unless you're trying to get coffee, probably not. There should be something set up that deals with those issues so that the appropriate people can act their wage and solve those problems. So the first thing that any company, regardless of size, needs to have in place is a business infrastructure. One that I'm very commonly familiar with is the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS. It's a
Right.
worldwide program that's taught. And just implementing the theories behind that type of operating system allows the company to be more structured and formal in the way that it addresses the business it wants to provide.
Gotcha. So yeah, and yeah, you talk a lot about the business operating system and um I was kind of intrigued, something as simple as a vision statement and defining what it is, what is it that we're setting out to do, um, can be a big deal. In fact, I remember hearing somebody say that it's kind of like, you saying, hey, we're going to go on a trip. Great. Where are we going to go? We're just going to go on a trip.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, where are we going to go? Without a
Yeah.
vision, it's like, we're just
That's
going.
right.
We're just going.
That's right. Well, if I'm a $5 million company today and I want to be a $10 million company, how am I going to get there? The desire to do it is great, but that's not what gets you there. It's putting a plan in place that allows for everyone involved in the process to know what the steps are. But they're
Okay.
also looking at the long range vision. Maybe that's a 3 year goal, a 7 year goal, whatever. But if it's stated and then it's explained to the folks that you work with, and then it's followed by all, that's a key EOS term. The cliche of let's all row in the same way is just that. But if nobody understands why they're in the boat or what an oar is supposed to do, it doesn't really matter.
Or where the boat's going to go, right? Where's our
That's exactly
destination?
right.
It's really hard to get behind it and put some effort into it if I don't know where I'm. Are we going to do this for a week, for a month, for a year? Yeah, it's hard to
Exactly.
get behind that.
Exactly correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So vision, is on the top of this list. People, of course, making sure that you
Yeah.
have the right people in the right spots.
And a lot of people that have smaller companies or on the independent side, every company in its evolution hits a ceiling of where they've grown as much as they can grow, and they need to figure out how they're going to break through that ceiling to get to the next level, whatever that is. And people are such an important component of that. So first of all, the vision is shared by all. It's stated, people know what it is. And by the way, that shouldn't be scary as a leader of a company to be able to say in 5 years I want to be here, in 10 years I want to be here.
Sure.
That doesn't always mean that's where you're going to end up. I mean, life is going to be what it's going to be. Business is going to go where it's going to go. But that puts it out there for people to be able to look at, all right, and focus
Yeah.
on. Now, when it comes to people, everybody has a special skill set that they only possess, right? That's every human being on the planet has that. However, as you're scaling your company, you need to keep an eye on who can help move that needle and push that person up to the next rung. It's not always the people that you have in place. Now, those people may transition to other things within your company. Sometimes they may decide this isn't for them or not the way they want it to go anymore. So I'm not advocating for if you want to move to the next level, okay, nice knowing you group of people and here's the new group of people at all. But you do need to assign the special talents that people have and what's been given them in order to help you move that specific side of the company. A lot of companies that start off with very well-intentioned leaders of companies. Maybe their skill set is good, that they're great mechanics, and now they want to become a business leader. But maybe their best talent is that they're great mechanics. Maybe they're not necessarily the leader and understand a P&L fully and all of those things. That's always okay. But you do have to have people in place that will help you. If you try to put everything on your shoulders and do it all of yourselves, learn this from doing it too.
Sure.
You only get to a certain point before there's burnout or there's loss of that vision, and people start to become less effective and
Well, I think to
interesting.
your point, I think burnout comes partly, as I've seen it in my life, right? When I'm trying to do some work that maybe I'm just not cut out to do, right? I've seen people move. Hey, let's promote so and so. He's the best salesperson. Let's make him the general manager. Well, he hates being a general manager. He doesn't like the spreadsheets and the people management. He really wants to sell, and that's where he thrives. And that's where he's doing great. So a promotion that direction is not going to serve him. It's not going to serve the company.
So through the EOS model, to your point, it has tools in there called people analyzers, and
Yes.
the leadership team can look at the staff of folks that they have and say, and in their own minds rate them to say, okay, yes, this person is great at this core value of our company as an example, and this person exemplifies it. This person maybe is challenged a bit by it. And you can look at just by doing that to say, okay, if I'm looking at these people objectively and where their natural talents are, and then I look and I put them into an accountability chart or an org chart. DOS teaches accountability chart first. Um, is that where they really should be?
Sure.
And a good leader is able to go to a person who works for them or works with them and say, look, I think you may excel here. I know you've been here for the past 20 years, but why don't we try this? And here's the reasons why. And you may see them flourish.
Right, right. Well, and having the the courage to have the hard conversation about, hey, I know you want this title, but I don't think that's the right role for you. And how do you navigate that conversation when somebody, well, I'm entitled because I was I showed up before him, so I should have that job,
Right.
or
Exactly.
whatever the case may be.
Exactly
So
right.
you talk a little bit about data. We won't dig into each of these, but data issues you brought up. How do you bring the
Yeah.
issue up to the appropriate level so it can get resolved?
So many times in my past, and this is regardless of fancy titles, but every issue can rise up to the wrong person if there's not a method in place for it to be resolved on the level that it should be resolved in, can be resolved in. And what EOS does, and other business operating systems do, is if you're running it through your entire company, it allows for issues to be raised by people. Let's say it's the finance group, and they're running their weekly EOS meeting, and in that group, one member of the finance team brings up an issue. And during that meeting, it's discussed, and the finance team as a whole says, you know what? This isn't in our realm of being able to make the decision for how this should go. We need to escalate this up. Then EOS allows for that issue to remain visible as it goes up to the next level.
Okay.
Right. So it doesn't get lost. A lot of times we're thinking, we got this, we got to deal with this, this, and this. Well, if you don't write them down, document them, or have a process for how they're resolved, they typically get forgotten or kicked around for months. On the opposite side of that, an issue that is brought up in my explanation of a finance team, this is the issue we're coming across. The finance team discusses it as a group and it's resolved. Well, then it still has traction, right? It gets resolved on the appropriate level, and I think that's what's really important for functionality of a company to be able to keep performing and moving
Yeah, yeah.
forward.
Well, and it sounds like you have to take a step back from your own business. I hear people talking about being in the business. Maybe I'm turning the wrench versus being working on the business and taking a bigger
Yep.
view and saying, oh, well, that's not even the right bolt or not even the right tie. Not even have the right part going on. If I'm too much in the weeds sometimes.
Well, sure, but I think based on volume of business and where the business is at, sometimes as something starts, that person is both the thinker of where the business is going to go and the way they see it moving, and the doer. But at some point, you're exactly right. You need to separate the fact of, this happens in leadership too. Managers versus leaders are two different things, right?
Sure.
So you have to be able to extrapolate yourself out of the day to day in order to see the bigger view, because without that bigger view, the vision gets cloudy. When the vision gets cloudy, everything else starts to slow down.
Well, and maybe it's only for a day, or maybe it's for a weekend, or maybe it's
Sure.
for a 3 day thing every quarter where, hey, let me step out of the weeds and
Yes.
and are we guiding the ship in the direction I want it to go? And if not, let's
Well,
make these changes.
the EOS teaches this, and that's why I loved it so much when I first came across it and implemented it. It kept everything so simple. So EOS states that you must go do what's called an accountability chart every 6 months. What does that mean? That means the leadership team goes offsite where they can talk privately and openly, and they talk about, okay, in the next 6 months, our goals are this. Let's talk about the people that we have, the positions we have in our company, and the way that we are structured. Can we achieve those goals under the current state? And the answer
Sure.
may be yes. But it forces you to, on a routine basis, revisit that, because if you don't, again, you'll start to go off track, um, or sway from the goal. In the same token, that EOS teaches companies to run their businesses on 90-day segments. That does not mean that you're running the financials and your budgets every 90 days and hoping you make your year, because you still have your year goals, 3, 5, 10 years. But what you're doing by putting into bite-sized chunks of 90 days, you're moving the business ahead in increments while staying accountable to the people that you answer to, that are watching what you've promised to do. And it creates traction by doing that. If you think about that, if everybody's doing that on every level of the company, think of the traction you're starting to get and moving
Yeah,
forward.
yeah. Well, if I'm not mistaken, I think the book itself on EOS is called Traction, right? Because the
It
idea
is.
of hey, actually moving down the field versus just wandering back and forth, and without kind of those 90-day snapshots, well, how do I even know if I moved it forward? Maybe I'm just
You don't.
wandering about, going in
But
circles.
In the same vein, though, if in the US world, they're called rocks, if I commit as an employee that within the next 90 days, I'm going to achieve the X, whatever X is, every week as I'm meeting with my team that I'm part of, I've committed to that team that in 90 days I'm going to do whatever this is. Okay, whatever.
Hmm.
Um, Now every week I've got to tell them, am I on track or am I off track? Very simple. Yes or no.
Sure.
Okay. Now if it's no, and I say, well, I just haven't gotten to it, and we're 8 weeks into the quarter, my team should challenge me and say, look, you promised. So it's a way of holding each other accountable here so
Well,
the
yeah.
traction actually occurs.
Yeah. And even asking, hey, what's going on? Right? Is there something we can do to support you? Because, we're all in this together. We're in the same boat. So, no, thank you. Thank you for kind of digging into that. And you had mentioned a data-driven maintenance program, which is
Sure.
kind of, from your paper, it looks like that's kind of the next step. Once you have developed a functioning business operating system, and you're kind of ticking along, you're actually making traction, making the direction you want to go. Is that kind of a next step then? Is a data driven maintenance
Yeah.
program?
And this where it can look like it's confusing and challenging, because again, if you look at a portfolio of 1,000 elevators under preventative maintenance of all types of contract, oil and grease, full maintenance, maybe just time and materials, it could be all different types of contracts with all different types of equipment in all different types of environments. Okay, that's
Sure.
typically the portfolio you're going to see
Right.
in a lot of companies. So how do you adequately provide the service that you're contracted to with your customer base? If you're doing it the traditional way, I don't think you'd have an answer for me because you would say, "Well, my mechanic's there every month."
Going to
Okay,
do
what's your
whatever
mechanic
needs
doing?
to be done. Right. I mean, it's
Which is important because
mhm,
routine of that human being in front of that piece of equipment every month is going to create uh, that person knowing what needs to be done every month.
sure.
But if you can look at and say, look, we're still going to give you time while you're there to do what you believe is necessary to do the equipment. But in this month, we're also going to want you to focus on these 5 tasks. And here's your timeline for doing that. Okay. That's a different way of looking at this here. Now, people have said to me, well, the mechanics have always led preventative maintenance in our industry. How would you get them to change the way they do things? And my response is it actually helps the customer more, enhances the equipment operational reliability more if we're able to actually structure this to ensure certain things are being done. How many times has a customer come back and said, the authority having jurisdiction was just in, they just did a survey of my equipment for the year, and they found the following 4 violations. Why weren't these done? I have a contract with you.
Right.
And the contractor says, well, geez, we're there every month. I don't know. So that's not an okay answer. You're contracted with somebody to provide a service. And saying I don't know or we'll take care of it next time still is not the right level of service to somebody you're promising something to.
Well, and
So if you
especially
can
what
look,
the answers they're looking for, right? I mean, you're not. It's not a surprise when an inspector shows up and says, "Hey, X, Y, and Z aren't done." I'm just saying you've got the same codes he does, right? So you could have checked X, Y, and Z, and you would know.
but the truth is we're not operating from we're meaning independents are not we're meaning companies are not uh, most of the time taking the time to have a very robust database of the customer's equipment that we're even
Sure.
servicing, right? We're doing this with um, and still the way we've been doing it for 20 years or more. And where
Right.
I'm recommending we move is that we look at saying, okay, this is the equipment, this is the type of elevator is, this is the vintage, this is the operating environment. And if we look at a customer and say, Mr. or Miss Customer, this is what you have, and this is what maintenance program we believe best fits the use of the elevator in its current operating condition, its current age. And then we make contract choices based on that analysis. I, mean, I didn't come up with this, Matt. John Koshak came up with this in the late 2000s with the
Okay.
MCP. Okay. This has been around for a while. It's a matter of how do we adopt it into the everyday use. Now, I want to caution and say that you can't just come with a task-based maintenance program and expect it to be commercially viable. You've got to be able to think about how you can incorporate those principles into what the market will bear and what a customer will pay.
Okay. So in other words, there's some thought, some planning, some discretion, some, you wouldn't necessarily apply the same tasks to a 50-year-old machine that you did the one that was modernized last week. Is
Correct.
that fair to say?
But correct. But you also, the way it's being done now in many cases is here's our offering, full maintenance oil and grease. Which would you prefer?
Yeah,
And that's not doing a service either. So my opinion is yes, this doesn't make the sale any more difficult to a customer. Actually, I think it's a breath of fresh air for you to be able to go to a customer who's already been through 9 times out of 10 poor service delivery, I'll just put it that way,
sure.
and say, look, I care enough as your service provider to have looked at this, to be able to say, this is your current situation and this is what I can offer you. And by the way, if we follow this program, your reliability is going to go up, your issues will be addressed more proactively, if not communicated more appropriately. So what we're trying to do is get a better relationship with the customer so that when the uh-oh does happen, we're not near predictive maintenance yet on any level. And
Sure.
we hear a lot of buzzwords about IoT and about AI that float around the world. In the elevator space, the ability to utilize those things based on the myriad of equipment that we have put together in elevator systems. Look, if I have a Honda, I've got a Honda. It's got all Honda parts in it. I could take it to Honda to be serviced. I can also take it to another provider to be serviced as well, but it's all Honda parts. Elevator systems aren't made up like that. They're
Sure.
typically, like I said in the beginning of this, they're all sorts of different things. So this is not by no means perfection, but it's a step ahead to be able to garner the customer's trust, to increase the stickiness of that customer because you're being honest with them.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And develop the relationship so that when you do need to move to, okay, and here's your capital planner for mod that we need to discuss in the next 2 to 3 years, them to be less uh, surprised and less upset that it has to be done because they've been kind of brought along to understand it has to be. And I
Right.
think that's the aim of the independents. They want to have that relationship with their customers.
And it sounds like, I mean, and you speak to this a little bit, you would have to go out and actually survey and know what kind of equipment we're talking about, and then say, hey, here are the things that need to happen, and here are the things we're willing to agree to. This is what you agreed to, that you're responsible for. Here's what we're responsible for. Instead of feel like a fresh air, a breath of fresh air, I would think the customers would also like that, because I don't think they have a lot of visibility into what their equipment needs. Not that they want to be experts, but if they're completely blind, well, then they're going to want to question everything, right? Why are you charging me again? I already paid you something. Why is this, you know?
Well, yes. I mean, I started my career in North Carolina selling maintenance contracts and repair. And, going to a customer and doing a survey was common. We would do it on a piece of paper. And typically, this is, 15, 20 years ago, but typically that piece of paper nothing ever happened to it after you'd done the survey. You'd gone back to your office, you created the proposal, you've done the steps to sign a customer. What I'm
Sure.
recommending is that we take that survey that's always been done, whether it was an ops person or a salesperson doing it, but we use that as the catalyst for where we start our relationship with the customer,
Sure.
actually using that data. And I don't believe that that's being done anywhere by any company on a scaled level. But again, truthfully, I don't want an adversarial relationship with a customer that I'm providing service to at all. But
Right.
if I can put little things in place that improve that and that create more of those connection points, I think that I'm providing a good service that right now I may be charging the same as my competition, but going down the road, if that service level is that good, I'll be able to charge more for it.
Yeah. Yeah. When you talk about contract revision, and it sounds like, if the contract's written, like you say, oil and grease or full coverage, it would need to be a new contract and say, hey, we're not going to play the either or game anymore. We're a different kind of provider.
Yes,
And here's
yes.
how we go to market.
And yes, and by the way, customers are still going to say no to that, even though it's the best idea since sliced bread. You're not going to fit the mold of every customer. I
Sure.
think that's okay, right? There are certain customers who get fired by contractors, and they just don't fit the mold, and that is all right. But what confidence a salesperson can walk into a customer's office and say, yes, I understand you've had experiences in the past with brand X, and yes, this is the way a lot of the industry does it. And here's our differentiator. This is what makes
Sure.
us different. And then actually being able to prove that, I think that's a game changer.
Absolutely. Well, and the fact that you've proven it out, means you've walked this path, you've done this work. So let's talk a little bit about the IoT for validating and monitoring. Because and I've been to some of the conferences and I hear people talk about different AI and different
Mhm.
tools that are possibilities. But I think what
Yes.
you're talking more about is actually a solution, a way to that they can be implemented now and bring great value.
So, as you know, when we presented down in the Bahamas for IEES, I partnered with Rob Worth at Lift AI to present. The reason being is I actually connected with him in 2019. This is an interesting story. Uh, when I became president of my last opportunity, um, this is a decade or so ago. Um, I I needed a type of mentorship in my professional growth, and I knew I did. And the elevator space being as unique as it was, I wanted to speak with other people that were running elevator companies. And one day I cold called a gentleman named Sean Madden, who ran Madden Elevator up in Louisville, Kentucky, and started talking to him about the way he ran his business. And frankly, it was because of the maintenance issue. I wanted to know how I can improve our maintenance way
Hmm.
back then. And that led to an introduction to Rob Worth over at Lift AI. And at the time, this is 2019 now, and the time I was interested in something very, I consider today to be amateurish, but what I wanted was the ability for a customer that was under service with my company to be able to look on their cell phone and see their elevator's health
Sure.
operation in the
Sure.
same way that I could turn my thermostat downstairs
Right.
right now if I want to, right? But what that has evolved to is the Internet of Things and AI, and the ability to connect elevators on a single platform. I believe is the next step in the technology revolution in the elevator industry. And what do I mean by that? Why is there value there? Well, if we've got our company structured so that we're providing the service and we're able to provide the service we are promising to our customers, and then we're running a data driven maintenance program based on the equipment that's specific to the customer, what more benefit can we have than to have a IoT device that's confirming all of that is happening? Okay, so I go to the customer and I say, this is our service offering. This is what we can provide to you based on the equipment that's installed in your building. And then I say, okay, in order to even kind of put my money where my mouth is, the IoT solution will provide the feedback loop that says, yes, based on the operation that we said we were selling to you, the maintenance we were selling to you based on your operation, this is the operation that's occurring, and here we are fulfilling the terms of our agreement. So the customer now has transparency in in what they're purchasing from the contractor. Now, that also has to be done in a scaled manner. You have to be able to scale it. And therefore, yes, there's many devices out there that connect to the controller that take
Sure.
all of the controller fault codes and that people, again, much smarter than I have to look at and understand what they mean. I'm not there yet technology wise, and I don't believe the industry's there yet. But this is a start to be able to start to accumulate data, to understand operations of components, and to see where that data leads us to in the next phase of technology in the space.
So help me, just being even, a step removed. I obviously haven't worked on elevators, but let's say I'm a customer, IoT devices on there. Is what you're describing like a weekly email with health information, or is it more of like here's an infographic that shows that of your 16, you know, uh, elevators, these three are green and this one's yellow and this one's red, or just
Mhm.
curious, what
Yep.
does that look like?
So the answer is yes.
Okay.
That it can be customized, and then Lyft AI
Okay.
is already doing this for their
Hmm.
customer portfolio that he's been growing. And just that simplistic information of how many trips, of
Sure.
how many landings an elevator serves. Think about this when you talk about data driven maintenance. If I send my mechanic, even let's forget about the tasks that have to be done on the visits, how much more efficient is my mechanic going to be if he goes to a building and he knows that the ninth floor is the most traveled to floor in that elevator? Okay.
Sure.
So now where's he going to focus his maintenance? Because we all know doors are 85% typically of all of our trouble calls. So where's he going to start to focus his maintenance? Well, the data is telling him you're going to go to floor 9 because that's the one that's hit all the time. And maybe you won't go to floor 4, but 3 times a year. That's a way of starting to specify the maintenance we're providing to the elevator based on the operation it's already performing daily. But that's juxtaposed to here's your ticket, go do maintenance.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and yeah, if you don't know, right, where to look for where it's,
Mhm.
most likely going to break down, then there's probably, it goes right to kind of service hour tracking and, efficiencies, because if it takes you an hour just to figure out that it was floor 4, well, then that's huge.
It's an hour, right? And let's be clear, AI, IoT, all of those things in the elevator space right now, without business principles and practices put in place with them, are not the solution,
Sure.
right? So there's not one solution that says, well, you put the look, companies have already tried this where they're putting devices on elevators, large companies, devices on elevators, and then reducing face time to the customer, right? Because, well, the device didn't say there's a failure, so we don't have to go for maintenance. What
Right.
I think is you do that the exact opposite way. Okay. You use the device to bring more maintenance, more opportunity to the customer. That's the better way to do it.
Well, I think in that case, the customer, I think they would be willing to pay more to know more, right? If you've got the data to support that, hey, this actually needs more service rather than less service. We're not just going to put a device on it and walk away and hope and pray it never hits our, sends us a text or whatever it does when it breaks. But I think the customers would say, oh, now I can understand why I need to pay a little bit more because of all this, data you're showing me.
It creates value, right? And you
Yeah,
cannot argue. You can't argue numeric. You can't not argue numbers. But I'll also say this: that for many years, people have tried different types of contracts, whether they be trip contracts or metered contracts. And what I'm recommending, and it's from the industry, okay, this is not company specific, this is for the entire industry, that we can move towards an improvement of service while maintaining margin and cementing our relationship with the customer in the areas that most independents are specializing in, which is that niche relationship with the customer.
yeah, yeah. So I've got just a few questions as we wrap up. And one
Sure.
of the big questions that comes to mind, I mean, obviously this trifecta is beautiful, and customer satisfaction and margins and everything. How have you seen this affect employees, and especially if I'm the chief mechanic and I'm used to just kind of doing what I want to do? What does that look like?
Yeah. So that's a challenge. Someone approached me when I discussed this with them about 3 years ago and said, how do you get your mechanics to do this? And my question back was, well, what do you mean? This is what we do. So,
Right.
and that's a very simplistic way of saying if you've built the culture in your company appropriately, or you're in process of building the culture based on vision, based on sharing knowledge. I believe in sharing a lot of financial
Sure.
information with employees, okay, appropriately. But look, they're all in the same game. An employee in the elevator industry is not an order taker, is not just doing a functional job. They're providing a service. That's a different level of employment. So you want them involved and ingrained in it. If you can develop a culture that allows that information to travel up and down, you're not afraid of sharing it, then when change occurs or you ask for change, it's met with less resistance because you can explain it and people have trust in you as leadership. I
Yeah.
made that sound
Thank you.
really easy. It does take a while to
No,
establish all that
yeah,
stuff, but those are
I'm
the,
sure.
the those are the tenets of it.
Yeah, and I'm sure it does. I think just hearing you say that, though, I mean, obviously there's a way, there's a process. It's not the first thing you do is go and tell chief mechanic that, hey, you can't do it anymore. You have to build the structure, build the culture, build the vision, and then start marching in the same direction. And then it seems to
Well,
make more sense when we say, oh, hey, and we're going to do this.
Yes, because now there's buy-in. I mean, certainly you could go to the chief mechanic and say, "This is what you're doing," and you can therefore look to how to replace them the next day.
Exactly. Yep. Um, so what would you say are the biggest hurdles to actually making this happen? What kind of pushback? What kind of pain points?
Yeah. Aside from if the culture piece isn't in place, then that's a major hurdle. You need to have buy-in of, like I was talking before, of your employees, top to bottom, of why. Okay,
Mhm.
and then to put it in place and remove the fear and the potential threat is the second thing. They'll see it work and say, "Wait a minute, this isn't change for the sake of somebody." I'm using finance again, but somebody in the finance office benefiting, and that's the only reason we're doing this. But I think that the second biggest challenge is the integrity of the data that's within the company. Again, a lot of companies have spent a lot of time providing service. The amount of work that goes into modernization is incredible for the amount for the margin return. It's incredible. So if you look at where companies have been focusing, it's on task-driven activities. So therefore, if you want to go make a change, as I said in the beginning of this, you cannot measure what you don't, or you cannot improve what you don't measure. You've got to have accurate data. And that can be just as simple as starting to understand how many hydraulic elevators you have versus traction in your portfolio, how many oil and grease versus how many full maintenance. That's very simplistic, but you've got to build some sort of data and it's got to be accurate. If it's not, then the programs will not succeed to maintain or raise the margin in the way that you'd like them to, and you'll lose a little bit of faith in your employees because you're giving them information that is dubious and they can question. Data would probably be the second after culture. That would be a challenge for implementing something like
You're good.
this.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So, Chris, last question I want to ask you is, let's say I'm a $5 to $10 million elevator service contractor. Where would I even start? What would be kind of the first step?
Yep. So I thought about this a lot uh, because I've been in that position before and thought those same things and hit ceilings where, it didn't matter how hard I worked and it didn't matter how much I was enthusiastic or I cared about the next steps and growth of the organization. I had to have team buy-in. And that was not by getting a meeting together and say, "Hey, team, this is where we're going. Rah, rah, let's go." It has to start with the building blocks of the company. You've got to have a vision and something in writing and in place that says, "This is what we look like today. This is where I want to look like in a year, 3 years, 5 years." Again, that may not occur in the way you write it down, but without at least thinking about it, doesn't give you a platform for a vision to be explained to people. So
Or be
you
executed for that matter?
or to be executed. But you can absolutely not move forward in this until you've got buy-in from the people that will do the work with you. That's the first thing. From there, once you've started to get buy-in, and these things can work in conjunction with each other, then looking at your maintenance portfolio, looking at the characteristics of what type of equipment I have, what type of what age, what type of environments I service more than others. Then you can start to do a little bit of data collection that formulates. Okay, now I know what I have. Let me think about plans I can put in place to start to dial into specifics. Once you've done that, that's very basic stuff and it takes a couple of months to put together. But once you've done that and you've understood now how to start directing maintenance, this is all about maintenance labor, by the way.
Sure.
It's the most expensive part of our day-to-day business, right?
Right.
So I want to know that if I've got a maintenance mechanic who's going to work 160 hours for me per month, I want to know what I should be able to derive from that effort. And if that maintenance mechanic is putting in 130 hours to maintenance, truly, because of the program I've written, what am I doing with those other 30 hours? All right. I'm not sending him home because I want to keep him as an employee. All
Sure.
right. But I need him to be doing work, him or her to be doing work that either adds to value somehow. So maybe I'm taking those 30 hours because now I know I have them available and I'm putting them onto a second part of a repair team. So there's a billable work, and now I'm pushing the repair yield up.
Sure.
Okay, more profit there too, right? Now you're starting to change the business mix of your company, and things change completely when you start to do that from a profitability perspective. Keep in mind, and I want everybody to hear this very clearly. This is not about reducing time on maintenance. This is not about removing the elevator mechanic from the site. This is about enhancing it, but also giving clarity to the customer on what they have bought and what they should expect.
And as you do so, maintaining and building your margin, right? I think that's the
Exactly right. So it
Mhm.
is a win-win,
Yeah.
but it is a departure on the way that we typically and normally have done things for the past couple of decades. But I don't see how we move forward as an industry without, getting more black eyes for poor maintenance. That's, look, there's a stigma out there of elevator service providers because of the way customers have been treated. And look, there's a certain pride also that mechanics have with the equipment they take care of. They're proud of it. Okay. But when you reduce mechanics' ability to maintain equipment, you don't just erode the customer relationship, you erode the pride and tradition of that mechanic. And that's not what this industry was built on. And that's not how this industry remains strong. I say you can restore it both and maintain margin and grow it at the same time.
Awesome. Chris, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you being willing to be on today and share some of your insights.
My pleasure, Matt. Thank you for having me. It was an honor.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Elevator Careers Podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group, a leader in elevator industry recruiting. You can check us out online at elevatorcareers.net. Please subscribe, and until next time, stay safe.